A good Vach, Shavua Tov, a good week to you, my holy sisters and brothers. It's great to be starting the week learning together, and there's some amazing teachings tonight. I was thinking about making it a key daf. It's not quite a key daf, but there's a fascinating and very famous teaching in tonight's page alluded to in the title of our show tonight. Let's light up the darkness with a new candle. All right. This is, I believe, our 756th show. We've gone through a lot of those candles. All right. Who's with us on a Saturday night? Paula in Chicago, Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, James in Annapolis, Yehuda in South Carolina, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Nancy in North Carolina, Bella in Florida, John in Maine, Judith in Arizona, Hannah in New York, Miriam in Colorado, Karen in Northern California. Paula, I will watch next couple of classes as we finally buried my mother-in-law today. May her memory always be for a blessing. Paula, I know she will be missed. What a beautiful tribute from her daughter-in-law. David in New Jersey, Shandora in the Bronx. Wait, where's YouTube over there? And Gigi in British Columbia over on the YouTube side. Welcome, everybody. Let's do some learning. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Miriam Kreisman from Montreal, my very dear friend. In honor of Success in Learning for the Kreisman family, may you all grow in wisdom and Torah knowledge every day. You, your husband, your kids, your family, all your descendants, may you be showered in blessings, and we say amen. And Miriam, thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Okay, we are on Daf Yud Zayin, page 17, here in Tractate Moed Katan, the laws of Chol Moed, the intermediate days of the festival. We're in chapter 3, and we've been talking about people who were prevented for various reasons from shaving, cutting their hair, laundering their clothes before the festival began, and whether or not they're going to be allowed to do those things, which normally are prohibited, on the intermediate days of the festival. One of those categories was somebody who was ostracized, was under a decree of ostracism from the sages, and that period of ostracism ended, or they rescinded the decree. It was nullified during the intermediate days, and so he would be able to shave and get a haircut at that time. But in pursuant to this idea, we've been learning more about the practice of ostracism among the sages. We continue that right at the top of 17a. If a student ostracized someone else due to an insult to his dignity, the aspiring Torah scholar's dignity, and not because the ostracized person was guilty of some transgression, that the person was sinning, and so ostracism was decreed upon him for his sin, but rather because he insulted the honor of this student, aspiring Torah scholar, who represents Torah and God in a sense, and that's why he's being careful about his honor. So if he imposed ostracism on this person because of that insult, then that decree of ostracism is valid, as was taught in a Baraisa. One who is ostracized by the teacher is considered ostracized with regard to the student. However, one who is ostracized by the student is not considered ostracized with regard to the teacher. And the Gemara attempts to draw an inference from a careful reading of this Baraisa. He is not considered ostracized with regard to the teacher, which implies that he is considered ostracized with regard to everyone else. So the decree of ostracism by the student applies to everyone except the teacher. And the Gemara, is going to be binding on everybody with regard to this person who was ostracized, everyone except the student's teacher. And the Gemara clarifies the case. For what reason was he ostracized? If it was a matter relating to heaven, in other words, because he had sinned, then why, if he was ostracized by the student, should he not be considered ostracized with regard to the teacher? Doesn't the verse state, Proverbs 21:30, there is no wisdom or understanding or counsel against the Lord? And this means that when a sin is committed and God's name is desecrated, all other considerations are ignored, even the eminence and knowledge of the teacher. And therefore, he too must treat the offender as ostracized. Rather, it is not that the Gemara is referring to a case where the student ostracized the other person due to Rather, is it not that the Gemara is referring to a case where the student ostracized the other person due to an insult to his own dignity? Therefore, it is apparent that his decree of ostracism is valid and binding upon all, with the exception of the student's teacher. And Rav Yosef said, a Torah scholar may execute judgment for himself with regard to a matter about which he is certain, and he is not required to go to court and have the case decided for him. And the same applies when another person behaves in a disrespectful manner toward him. He is permitted to go ahead on his own and ostracize him. When we talk about a Torah scholar, it's not just somebody who learns a lot of Torah. I learn a lot of Torah. I'm not a Torah scholar. I would not have this ability. This is a, established, reputable Torah scholar. Let's just continue. There was a certain Torah scholar who gained a bad reputation due to rumors about his conduct. And Rav Yehuda said, what should be done? To excommunicate him is not an option. Now here, excommunicate, this is the word that's being used is shamta, which is an Aramaic word, and is not like the other term that we've sometimes been using for excommunicate, which is at that higher level of ostracism, right? That first there's admonish, then there's ostracize, and then there's excommunicate. So excommunicate sometimes means that highest level where you put a total ban on a person and he's just ousted from the community and no one will talk to him. But also there's just this more generic term, the Aramaic term excommunicate, which just means like any of these categories, okay? So there was a certain Torah scholar who gained a bad reputation due to rumors about his conduct. And Rav Yehuda said, what should be done? To excommunicate him is not an option. The sages need him, as he is a great Torah authority. Not to excommunicate him is also not an option, as then the name of heaven would be desecrated, right? This is a Torah scholar known to be a Torah scholar who's going out and committing some kinds of sins. And so they have to do something about this. Otherwise, it's a desecration of God's name, a Chilul Hashem. So Rav Yehuda said to Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, have you heard anything with regard to this issue? And he said to him, well, right, it's not proven that the guy sinned, but there's rumors, right? So that's why there's a little bit of hesitation on Rav Yehuda's part. Well, have you heard anything with regard to this issue? And he said to him, Rabbi Yochanan said as follows, what is the meaning of that which is written? For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek Torah at his mouth, for he is a messenger, malach. That's the same word as angel. An angel in Hebrew and a messenger is the same word, a malach, of the Lord of hosts. And this verse teaches, if the teacher is similar to an angel, a malach of the Lord, then seek Torah from his mouth. But if he is not pure and upright, then do not seek Torah from his mouth. So even if he is knowledgeable about Torah, do not learn from him. It's almost like, one of the most important professors in their yeshiva, was rumored to be sinning. And they're like, well, but he teaches like a very popular, important class and we can't replace him so quick. All we've got is rumors. How should we handle this? So this answer comes, well, listen, if he's indeed behaving that way, you cannot be learning Torah from him. Based on this statement, Rav Yehuda ostracized that Torah scholar, that these rumors, I guess the rumors were strong enough that, there was substance to them. So Rav Yehuda ostracized that Torah scholar. In the end, after some time had passed, Rav Yehuda took ill and he was on the verge of death. And the sages came to inquire about his well-being. And the ostracized scholar came along with them as well. When Rav Yehuda saw him, that scholar, he laughed. And the ostracized scholar said to him, was it not enough that you excommunicated that man, meaning me, but now you even laugh at me? And Rav Yehuda said to him, I was not laughing at you. Rather, I am happy as I leave this world and go to the other world, that I did not flatter even a great man like you, but instead I treated you fairly in accordance with the halakha, the law. And then Rav Yehuda died, right? So he might have been tempted because this guy was such a, powerful, important teacher to just let those rumors slide. But he's glad that as he's leaving this world that he handled it as he ought. Now, the ostracized scholar came to the study hall and he said to the sages, release me from the decree of ostracism that Rav Yehuda placed on me. The sages said to him, there is no man here as eminent as Rav Yehuda who can release you from the ostracism. Rather, go to Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, right? That's the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya is also the Nasi of the Sanhedrin in his generation, in Eretz Yisrael, right? So this is the Babylonian Jewish community. This fellow, this ostracized scholar, he's going to have to travel a long way, right? From Iraq to, to Israel at a time when travel was not easy in order to have this ban, this decree of ostracism lifted off from him by a, more prominent scholar, in this case, Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. Only he can release you. The scholar took the trip. He came before Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya said to Rabbi Ami, go and examine this case. If it is necessary to release him from his decree of ostracism, release him on my behalf. Rabbi Ami examined his case and thought at first to release him from his ostracism. But Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani rose up on his feet and said, if the maidservant in the house of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, right, so the current Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, his grandfather, who was also the Nasi, in his generation, a maidservant in his house once ostracized another person, and the sages did not relate frivolously to her decree of ostracism and did not revoke it until 3 years had passed. All the more so with regard to a decree of ostracism placed by Yehuda, Rav Yehuda, our colleague, we must take it seriously and not release this scholar so quick. Rabbi Zera said, what caused this elder, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, to come before us in the study hall today, though for many years he did not come, and now he comes precisely during this discussion? Learn from this that it is not necessary to release him from this decree of ostracism, as this combination of events is certainly not a coincidence, right? So here we are at Accidental Talmudists, where we definitely believe that there are no accidents, and when something seems like a big coincidence, it's some kind of a clue from heaven that you should pay attention. And here, this Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, who had been absent from the study hall for many, many months, happened to come back on that day, heard what they were about to do to release this guy from Bavel, from his ostracism imposed by Rav Yehuda. And he says, yeah, you shouldn't do that. And then they say, well, the fact that he's here today and has this objection, we can't ignore that. Rather, it should be viewed as an instructive sign from heaven. Consequently, Rabbi Ami did not release him from the ostracism, and the ostracized scholar left in tears. A wasp came and stung the ostracized scholar on his penis, and he died. I'm just reading what it says here, folks. Because he was a great Torah scholar, they took him into the caves in which the pious are interred in order to bury him there. But the caves did not accept him. A snake stood at the entrance of the caves and did not let them pass. They took him into the caves of the judges, and they accepted him. This guy was, he had been a prominent sage in his time. His name is not being reported to us because this whole story reflects so badly on him. He wasn't allowed to, God arranged, right, that this snake would be at the mouth of the cave of the pious, and he wasn't allowed to be buried there, but he was allowed to be buried in the cave of the judges. The judges, that's going to be a very high level, again, of Torah scholars who are going to be allowed to be buried in the cave of the judges. What's going on here? The Gemara asks, what is the reason that he was accepted there? It seems like there was something going on with him, right? These rumors must have had substance. Rav Yehuda ostracized him. They were going to release him from it. And then there was a sign from heaven, the presence of Shmuel Bar Nachmani on that day, that they shouldn't release him. The guy wept. Then he was, killed in a very painful way, a wasp sting in his privates that led to his death. Probably he was, sensitive to wasp venom, but it killed him, and it was such a tender area that would make it even more painful. They wouldn't, heaven wouldn't allow them to bury him in the cave of the pious, but would allow him to be buried in the cave of the judges. We would think that this guy must have been guilty of some really heinous sins, even more than what they knew about, and so he didn't deserve to be in the cave of the pious, and the ostracism was valid. But then why is he being allowed, is heaven saying he is allowed to be buried in the cave of the judges? So the Gemara answers, even though he sinned, he still acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Ilai, as it is taught in a Baraisa. There's a very famous teaching from Rabbi Ilai. If a person sees that his evil inclination is gaining control over him and he cannot overcome it, then he should go to a place where he is not known. He should wear black, and he should wrap his head in black, as if he were a mourner. Perhaps these changes will influence him so that he not sin. Even if these actions do not help, he should at least do as his heart desires in private and not desecrate the name of heaven in public. Although this person had sinned, at least he did so in private and in a manner that did not publicly desecrate God's name, and therefore it was fitting that he be given an honorable burial. So where do we come from? We're talking about that if you insult a Torah scholar, that's like desecrating God's name because he's a representative of God and God's Torah. When you look about a Torah scholar himself, if he sins and it's known to the public, that is a desecration of God's name. People are weak. They succumb to their urges. It happens, right? So what Rabbi Ilai is saying, okay, well, if you feel like you just got to commit that sin, your evil inclination is ruling over you, then what you do is almost like you feed the evil urge a little bit and say to it, all right, well, I'm going to give in to you, but not today. I'm going to go where they don't know me so that it won't be a Torah scholar committing this sin. It won't be a prominent person committing this sin. It'll just be some unknown person in an unknown city, and I'll succumb to my urge over there. Hopefully, when he goes to all this trouble of making the trip and putting on clothes and then going to, wherever the house of sin is that whatever kind of sin he's going to indulge in, hopefully he's had time to cool off and say, what am I doing? This is terrible. I'm not going to do it. And even if he does do it, at least it won't be a desecration of the name. The Gemara asks, what is the story mentioned by Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani involving the maidservant in the house of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? So this was just a maid in the Nasi's house who said that man should be ostracized, and the sages listened to her. She wasn't a Torah scholar, but they accepted her decree of ostracism on some individual. What was the story? It was related that the maidservant in Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's house saw a certain man who was striking his adult son. She said, let that man be excommunicated due to the fact that he has transgressed the injunction, you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. And the verse speaks here of one who strikes his adult son, as the son is likely to become angry and strike his father back, thereby transgressing the severe prohibition against striking one's parent, right? There's no one of the 10 commandments which says honor your son or your daughter. It says honor your mother and your father, right? But if a man strikes, punches, hits, slaps his adult son, right? It's a stumbling block before the blind because in his anger, that adult son might hit the father back, and then he would be guilty of a much bigger sin. Similarly, it was related that Reish Lakish was guarding an orchard for payment when a certain man came and ate some figs that were growing there. Reish Lakish raised his voice and yelled at him, but this man paid no attention to him and kept eating. Reish Lakish said, Reish Lakish, the great scholar and debate partner, learning partner of Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish raised his voice and yelled at him, but the man paid no attention and kept eating. Reish Lakish said, let that man be in a state of excommunication. The man eating the figs said to him, on the contrary, let that man, meaning Reish Lakish, be in a state of excommunication. For even if I have become liable to you for payment, as I have eaten of the figs without permission, have I become liable to you for excommunication? And with that statement, the man left. Now Reish Lakish, who was a pious and honest man, went to the study hall to inquire about the law with regard to what had just happened. And the other sages said to him, that man's decree of ostracism is valid, but your decree of ostracism is not. In other words, the man was correct. Reish Lakish should not have ostracized him in response to his actions. You could fine him, you could bring him before the court to pay damages, you could bring witnesses to testify against him, all those things. But ostracism was not the correct punishment at that time for that action. And because Reish Lakish issued a decree of ostracism inappropriately, when the man said, no, you're ostracized, that was valid because a Torah scholar issuing a faulty decree of ostracism is a big problem. Reish Lakish then asked, if so, what is the remedy for this decree of ostracism? And the sages answered him, go to him so that he may release you from it. And Reish Lakish replied, I do not know him. They said to him, well, then go to the Nasi so that he may release you from the ban, as it is taught in a Baraisa, if one was ostracized, but he does not know who ostracized him, and it was a valid decree of ostracism, then he should go to the Nasi, and the Nasi may release him from his decree of ostracism. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yehuda said that in Usha, it was enacted, if the president of the court sinned, he is not ostracized. Although this would be the appropriate punishment, he is not ostracized so as not to cause a desecration of God's name. Rather, they say to him, the words of the verse, keep your honor and stay at home. 2 Kings 14:10, which means to preserve your dignity, it would be best for you if you were to stay home, resign your position, and refrain from further public appearances. Actions have consequences, right? So this guy in a very prominent place has committed an action that demeans the office. Now, they can make him resign without announcing to the public that he's ostracized, meaning that the president of the court fell from grace because of his sin. So it would be better not to desecrate God's name in that way, but it's not like he's going to keep his job. He's going to lose his job, and he should stay home, and then they won't publicly humiliate him in addition. If he sins again, then he is ostracized due to the desecration of God's name that would ensue were people to think that he was spared his rightful punishment due to his high position. So there's going to be a certain amount of latitude for prominent people just to avoid besmirching the importance and holiness of the office that they occupy, but only a certain amount of latitude and no more. The Gemara comments, this opinion disagrees with that of Reish Lakish. For Reish Lakish said, if a Torah scholar sins, he is not ostracized at all in public, As it is stated, therefore shall you fall in the day, and the prophet also shall fall with you in the night. Hosea 4:5. And this is explained to mean, if a prophet or any other important person sins, his offense should be concealed like the night and not punished in public. What is the law on this? If the president of the court sinned, if the head of a court or an eminent Torah scholar sins, he should not be publicly ostracized unless he committed major transgressions and is leading other members of the community astray, like Jeroboam ben Nebat. If he repents but commits other sins, then he should be punished with lashes in private. But there was that, that caveat of major transgressions, right? I mean, in the last few years, we've seen people, in a lot of places that very respectable, seemingly respectable people, who were sexually abusing others, etc. That's a major transgression, and they're not going to get away with that, right? That they get brought down, and quite rightly. Okay, with regard to this issue, it was related that when a Torah scholar would become liable to be punished with excommunication before Mar Zutra the pious, Mar Zutra would first excommunicate himself as a mark of respect for the Torah scholar, and afterward he would ostracize the Torah scholar. And this self-imposed excommunication was meant only as a show of honor to the other Torah scholar, and therefore when Mar Zutra would enter the house of lodging, he would release his own excommunication, and afterward he would release the other's excommunication. And Rav Gidel said that Rav said, a Torah scholar may ostracize himself, and he may similarly release himself from self-imposed ostracism. And Rav Papa said, I have good coming to me, for I am praiseworthy, as I have never ostracized a Torah scholar. And the Gemara asks about this. Well, if so, when a Torah scholar was liable to be ostracized, what would he do? And the Gemara answers, he did as they do in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, where they appoint a court to give a Torah scholar lashes, but they do not appoint a Torah scholar they do not appoint a court to ostracize him. That is to say, lashes were preferred over ostracism. There are different punishments available, right? So depending on the sin, if possible, better to give him lashes than ostracism so that he can keep learning and teaching. Although learning and teaching was allowed during ostracism, but still, again, this issue of desecrating the name. And the Gemara proceeds with a discussion that explains the severity of the punishment of excommunication. What is the meaning of the word excommunication? Shamta. Right now, Shamta. Rav said this word is a contraction of the expression, there is death. Sham mita. It's an Aramaic word, alluding to the deathly aspect of excommunication. And Shmuel said, Shamta means that he will be a desolation. Shemama yihiyeh. And it is effective upon him like fat smeared on an oven. Just as some of the fat will always remain absorbed in the walls of the oven, so too, some aspect of the curse contained in the excommunication will continue to adhere to him even after the excommunication has been nullified. Now you see why lashes would be preferable to excommunication. So this word shamta, this word is Aramaic and it means to ostracize or to excommunicate. The explanations offered by the sages for this word are not meant to teach about its etymology, but rather are meant to allude to the severity of ostracism. The Gemara comments, and this opinion disagrees with the opinion of Reish Lakish, for Reish Lakish said, just as ostracism enters the 248 organs of one's body when it is first pronounced, so too when it leaves from his 248 organs, right? He says that when you get ostracized and then eventually the decree is nullified, it doesn't adhere. It shouldn't harm your reputation going forward. And the following allusion is offered in support of the opinion of Reish Lakish. When it enters all the organs, as it is written, and the city shall be a curse, cherem. That's the term for the full excommunication. Joshua 6:17. And the numerical value, the gematria of the word cherem, is, which is a concept similar to ostracism, is 248. Therefore, the verse alludes to the fact that the decree of ostracism penetrates one's 248 organs. When it leaves all the organs, as it is written, in wrath, remember, rachem. Habakkuk 3:2. And the numerical value of the word rachem is also 248, thereby teaching that when the decree of ostracism is revoked, it disappears entirely. The Gemara continues discussing the power of a ban. Rav Yosef said, cast an excommunication on the tail of the dog, and the excommunication, will do its work and harm the dog. It was related that there was a certain dog that would eat the shoes of the sages, and they did not know who was causing this damage. They thought it was a person. And so they excommunicated whoever was doing it. Soon thereafter, the dog's tail caught fire and got burnt. And this shows that excommunication can have a harmful effect, even on a dog. It was further related that there was a violent person who caused suffering to a certain Torah scholar. This Torah scholar came before Rav Yosef to ask what he should do. Rav Yosef said to him, go and ostracize him. This Torah scholar said to him, I'm afraid of him, that he will harass me even more. Rav Yosef said to him, take out, i.e. publish a written ostracism against him. The Torah scholar said to him, all the more so I'm going to be afraid of him, for if I publicize the matter, he will certainly come after me. Rav Yosef said to him, do as follows. Take the written ostracism and place it in a jug and set it down in a cemetery, meaning where nobody is around, and sound 1,000 shofar blasts over the course of 40 days. 1,000 means many, not literally 1,000. So the Torah scholar went and did this. The jug burst and the violent man died. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason that shofarot are sounded when a decree of ostracism is pronounced? And the shofar blasts allude to the fact that they extract punishment, shenifra'in, similar to shofar, from the excommunicated person. The Gemara asks further, what is the reason that broken blasts are employed? That they're not but rather right? Broken blasts are sounded on the shofar when the excommunication is pronounced. And Rav Yitzhak, the son of Rav Yehuda, said it breaks tall buildings, i.e. a decree of ostracism can harm and break even the high and mighty. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, wherever it says that the sages set their eyes in anger upon a particular person, it causes either death or poverty. Don't anger a sage. It is taught in the Mishna and the Nazir. So we're finally getting back to the subject of who can get a haircut on the intermediate days of the festival. We've been talking about the one who was ostracized and his ban was lifted. Now we're talking about the Nazir. This was one who took a vow not to benefit from the grapevine in any way, nor to cut his hair during the days of his Naziris. The most famous Nazir was Samson, in the story of Samson and Delilah. And the Nazir, whose term of Naziris ended on the intermediate days of a festival, and the Metzora, the one who has the outbreak on his skin, related to spiritual malady, not a physical one, and the Metzora, who needs to purify himself on the intermediate days and must shave his entire body in order to leave his state of ritual impurity and regain his ritual purity, to leave his tuma and become again tahor. These people are permitted to cut their hair on the intermediate days of the festival because they were not able to do so on the eve of the festival. And Rabbi Yirmiyah raised a question before Rabbi Zera. Is this allowance limited to the case where they did not have time to cut their hair before the festival, as it was prohibited for them to do so beforehand? Or perhaps they may cut their hair even in a case where they had time to do so beforehand. Okay, they had the opportunity. Their Naziris ended, or the Metzora was healed before the festival began, and he could have cut his hair then, but he didn't. Can he do it now on the intermediate days of the festival? He said to him, we already learned this in a Baraisa, with regard to all those about whom the sages said that they are permitted to cut their hair on the intermediate days of a festival, they may do so only if they did not have time to cut their hair before the festival. But if they did have time before the festival began, then they are prohibited from doing so. However, a Nazir and a Metzora, even if they had time to do so before the festival, they are permitted to cut their hair. And why are they granted this special allowance? So that they will not delay in bringing their offerings. A Nazir, when he finishes his Naziris, cuts his hair that he let grow all during the days of his Naziris, and then he has to bring certain offerings to complete the Naziris. When the temple is standing, he has to bring certain offerings. Likewise, the Metzora. Once the Tzara'as leaves him, He goes through that 7-day purification. He has to shave off all the hair on his body. And then to finish it, in addition to immersion, he has to bring certain offerings in the temple. So both the Nazir and a leper must cut their hair before sacrificing their offerings in completion of their purification process. Therefore, if they are not permitted to cut their hair, they will not be able to sacrifice their offerings at the proper time. And so because of that, they're going to be allowed to cut their hair even when others are not. It was taught in a baraisa, a priest and a mourner are permitted to cut their hair during Hol HaMoed, the intermediate days of the festival. And the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances when the mourner is permitted to do so? If we say that the 8th day of his mourning occurred on the eve of the festival, then he should have cut his hair on the eve of the festival, as the more stringent restrictions of his mourning no longer applied. Rather, it must be that we are dealing with a case where the 8th day of his mourning occurred on Shabbos. That was the eve of the festival. So a festival that's a Sunday, Monday festival. The first 2 days of Passover are Sunday, Monday, or in Israel, just Sunday. But Shabbos comes before. You can't cut your hair on Shabbos. So that person should have cut his hair on Friday. But if on Friday he was still in his mourning period, he couldn't do that. So rather, it must be that we are dealing with a case where the 8th day of his mourning occurred on Shabbos. That was the eve of the festival, and so he could not cut his hair on the festival eve. But if this is the case, he should have cut his hair on Friday. How could he cut his hair on Friday? On Friday, it was still the 7th day. It was the Shiva, right? It was still the 7th day of his mourning. He can't cut his hair on that day. But according to Rav Yehuda, who said that Ravina Bar Shela said, the halacha, the law, is in accordance with the opinion of Abba Shaul. If the deceased was buried 7 days before the festival, then not only has the mourner completed the 7-day mourning period, but he is even regarded as having begun the 30-day mourning period, and so the festival cancels his 30-day period of mourning. Right? There are many restrictions that, right, a mourner, like on the first day, that's his acute mourning, and he's like, there's many things he cannot do. And then during the 7 days, there's a lot of things that he still cannot do. After the 7 days, now we're in the 30-day period where he still is restricted from certain things. But that, if a festival comes, that 30-day known as the Shloshim, that is canceled. And so the festival cancels the 30-day period of mourning. And the rabbis concede to the opinion of Abba Shaul when the 8th day of his mourning occurs on Shabbos, that is the eve of the festival, and they maintain that he is permitted to cut his hair on Friday. Since he is unavoidably prevented from cutting his hair on the 8th day, the rabbis made a special dispensation and allowed him to cut it already on the 7th day. And the Gemara answers, no. The ruling of the Baraisa is necessary in the case where the 7th day of his mourning occurs on Shabbos, and that is the eve of the festival. In that case, he certainly cannot cut his hair on Friday because it is only the 6th day. The rabbis said maybe you could cut your hair on the 7th day, but certainly they didn't say you could cut it on the 6th day. And so he is and that's why he's permitted to cut his hair on Chol HaMoed. And the Gemara comments, we've been on the B side for a while, and the Gemara comments, the Tana of the Baraisa who permits a mourner to cut his hair during Chol HaMoed holds in accordance with the opinion of Abba Shaul, who said the legal status of part of the day is like that of an entire day, and therefore the 7th day counts as both the final day of the 7-day mourning period and the first day of the 30-day mourning period. And from the perspective of the laws of mourning, one would be permitted to cut his hair. However, since this day is Shabbos, he is unavoidably prevented from doing so, and therefore he is permitted to cut his hair on Hol HaMoed. The Tana of our Mishnah, I'm almost done by the way, so get your questions and comments in. The Tana of our Mishnah, on the other hand, who does not mention that a mourner is permitted to cut his hair on the intermediate days of a festival, holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who say, we do not say that the legal status of part of the day is like that of an entire day for a mourner. Therefore, he has not yet completed his 7-day mourning period, and consequently, he will not be permitted to cut his hair even after the festival until the completion of the 30-day mourning period. Let's look at the halacha of this. If one buried his deceased relative 7 days before the festival, and he mourned for 7 days, then the festival cancels the 30-day period of mourning known as Shloshim. This applies even if the 7th day occurs on the day before the festival, due to the principle that part of a day has the halachic status of an entire day in accordance with the opinion of Abba Shaul. So that is the law. In addition, such mourners are permitted to cut their hair, launder their clothes, and bathe on the day before a festival, close to nightfall. On the day before Passover, a mourner may perform these activities from midday onward so that he may bring the paschal offering at the proper time when the temple is standing in Jerusalem and we're bringing the paschal offering. On the day, others say that it is preferable for him to cut his hair before midday. And similarly, if the 8th day of his mourning falls on Shabbos, on the day before a festival, then he may cut his hair, launder his clothes, and bathe on Friday, which is his 7th day of mourning. If he did not cut his hair in these cases, then he is prohibited from doing so during the intermediate days. However, he may do so after the conclusion of the festival. If his 7th day of mourning falls on Shabbos, on the day before a festival, then he is permitted to cut his hair during Chol Moed, since he was unable to do so before the festival. Okay, and then I think that's going to be enough. Well, we're doing pretty good on time. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara continues and asks, the case of a priest who is permitted to cut his hair during the intermediate days of a festival, what are the circumstances? If we say that he completed his watch on the eve of the festival, well, then he should cut his hair on the eve of the festival. So the Gemara answers, no, the ruling of the Bryce is necessary in the case where one completed his watch during the festival week itself. And the Tan of our Mishna holds that since we learned in a Mishna, in Sukkah 55b, we covered this, during the 3 pilgrimage festivals, all of the priestly watches share equally in the festival offerings and in the division of the showbreads among the priests on Shabbos that occurs on a festival. Right? During the festivals, Passover and Sukkot, right? We have all the priests that served in the temple were divided into 24 groups that each served for 1 week at a time. But during Passover and Sukkot, when so many people are in Jerusalem and bringing offerings, all of the priests are serving during those weeks. And so the portions that are divided in the temple that are specially, for the privilege of the priest to eat that, including the showbreads that are on the special table for a week at a time, and then they get distributed to the priests who are there on Shabbos, who gets those showbreads. That's what we're talking about. Right? So this priest, he is considered like one whose watch was not completed during the festival, and he may not cut his hair until after the festival. And the Tana of the Baraisa holds that although he belongs also to those other watches that are serving during the festival, nevertheless, his own watch was completed before the festival, and so he is permitted to cut his hair. The sages taught the following Baraisa. All those about whom it was said that they are permitted to cut their hair, Chol Moed, because they were unable to do so beforehand, they may similarly cut their hair during the period of their mourning as if they had been unable to do so beforehand. And the Gemara asked, but isn't it taught in another Baraisa? They're nevertheless prohibited from cutting their hair during the period of their mourning. And Rav Yehuda said that Rav Shela said when it is taught in the Baraisa that they are permitted to cut their hair, it is referring to one for whom 2 periods of mourning applied in succession. In other words, this person was required to practice 1 period of mourning immediately following another period of mourning. God forbid it should happen to any of us, right? But during Shiva, you lose another close relative, and then there's another burial and another Shiva right on the heels of the first one. And so you couldn't, cut your hair, shave, launder your clothes for 14 days. And the Gemara asks, if this is referring to a case where his mourning applied in succession, then why specifically does the Baraisa discuss all those about whom it was said that they may cut their hair? The allowance should apply even to everyone, not only to those who had been unavoidably prevented from cutting their hair in the preceding period. As it is taught in a Baraisa, if one's mourning periods applied in succession, one after the other, and his hair grew long and became heavy, he may lighten it by cutting his hair with a razor, and he may wash his garment in water so that he does not suffer for such a long time without cutting his hair or washing his clothes. The Gemara answers, but wasn't it said with regard to that Baraisa? Rav Yehuda said when it states that one may cut his hair, it means that he may do so with a razor, but not with scissors. Similarly, when it states that one may wash his clothes, it means that he may launder them with water, but not with netter or soap. Therefore, the Baraisa teaches that if one had been unavoidably prevented from performing these actions beforehand, and then had to observe a double mourning period, he may cut his hair in an ordinary manner, without performing these actions in an altered way. And Rav Yehuda said that is to say that generally speaking, a mourner is prohibited from laundering his clothes. The sages taught the following Baraisa, just as the sages said that it is prohibited to cut one's hair during Chol Moed, so too it is prohibited to cut one's nails during the intermediate days of a festival. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Yosef permits cutting your nails on Chol Moed. And just as the sages said that a mourner is prohibited from cutting his hair during the period of his mourning, so too he's prohibited from cutting his nails during the period of his mourning. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yosef permits. And Ula said, the halacha, the law, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to mourning, but the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef with regard to Chol Moed. Shmuel said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef with regard to Chol Moed and with regard to mourning. As Shmuel said, this general principle, the law is in accordance with the statement of the more lenient authority in matters concerning mourning, the mourning of a mourner. Okay, that's where we're going to leave off. And about this question of cutting nails during Chol Moed, is it permitted? Some explain that according to Rabbi Yosef's opinion, nothing is accomplished by cutting one's nails before a festival because they grow so quickly. Even cutting them immediately before the festival does not prevent the need to cut them during the intermediate days. Others suggest that long fingernails are especially repulsive, and the sages were not strict with such a minor type of work. You can't cut your nails on Shabbos. You can't cut your nails on the festival itself, but on Chol Moed, you can. Okay, let's go to any questions or comments. Sam, a very important lesson from the text. Do not bring shame to someone by mentioning their name in an embarrassing, even if necessary, story. Exactly, right? So this is an important story that we heard about that Torah scholar that was ostracized by Rav Yehuda, and then Rav Yehuda died, and the man went to Israel to get the ban lifted by Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, and that led to all kinds of other stuff, and it was like a long story all about the matter of ostracism. And then this guy met a tough end, but was buried in a dignified way. And throughout that whole story, we never learned that man's name so as not to humiliate him. I agree with you, Sam, a very important lesson there. Hannah, do we really have 248 organs? Okay, so I believe that the way that the sages count the parts of the body is that we have 248 organs, and we have 365 limbs and sinews. Why is that an important number? 365, that's the days of the year, right? When we, it's not that we just think about God and try to act in a holy manner on Shabbos and festivals, but every day is a correct time to bring holiness into our lives in the most mundane areas of life. That actually was the lesson from this past week's Torah portion, Mishpatim, which I taught about at Arminian, and then Rabbi Halberstam also taught. He didn't hear my talk, but we both said much the same thing to introduce the stories that we were going to use to illustrate this point. That, the previous week's Torah portion was Yisro, which was the giving of the Ten Commandments and the greatest moment in human history, the manifestations, God on the mountain, etc. And then the very next portion is Mishpatim, which is all kinds of laws and damages. And for example, if you dig a hole and your neighbor's ox falls into it and dies, how much do you owe him? Who keeps the carcass? I mean, seemingly much more mundane manners, that incredible revelation at Mount Sinai in the Big Ten of the Commandments, the Ten Commandments. But the lesson is that you find God and holiness in the most mundane aspects of our life. And Rav Yehuda, who we're talking about tonight, says in Bava Kama, Tractate Bava Kama, page 30a, that who is a chassid of God, who is a pious person who really loves God, somebody who's meticulous in matters of civil law and damages, meaning he's going to be very careful to make sure that he never in any way could even be thought of misappropriating somebody else's property. He's just going to be meticulous to be careful about all kinds of laws. That's an everyday type of lesson. So that's the 365 parts of the body. We want then the organs, which is the rest of what's in our body, to add up to 613, right, which is the number of commandments that we're bound by, that a Jew is bound by. And so therefore, 248 works out as the number of organs, so that added to 365 produces 613. So, what is an organ? It's not only like a heart, a liver, but all kinds of body parts that are not included in limbs and sinews. What is the biggest organ in the body? I remember this from 9th grade biology. Your skin. Your skin is the biggest organ in your body. And Bill, they found shoes having been eaten and thought this was the work of a person, like tooth marks and all. What can I say? This dog was, the way that he destroyed the slippers maybe was not chewing. Maybe he did something else. He just pulled on it and the straps broke. I don't know. Okay, guys, that's what we've got tonight. With God's help, we'll be together tomorrow. No class tomorrow. I'm actually going out to Palm Springs to play in a charity golf tournament for one of the Chabad synagogues out there. And I was invited to be a guest, so I won't make it back in time. No class tomorrow, Sunday. And with God's help, we'll be together again Monday. And we'll do a double daf either that day or the next day that it makes sense because the pages are relatively short to do the double. So no class tomorrow. And with God's help, we'll be together again Monday night at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night and a good week. Shavua Tov.